Hello, and welcome to the main portion of the 2020 Penn State Dairy Nutrition Workshop. We're coming to you in a very different manner this time, for one time only. Next year, we will be at the Hershey Lodge and Convention Center. Our topic this year is related to feeding corn silage to the dairy herd. And it's a very important topic from the standpoint of dairy farms and nutritionists in many parts of the US and specifically in the Northeast, where we have a great emphasis on corn silage in our dairy rations. We've got a variety of experts on several topics related to corn silage feeding of the dairy herd for you. We have Lehman talking about wild yeast and silages and the TMR. We have John talking about seed genetics and hybrid selection. Luis is going to be covering issues related to the corn silage nutritive value. Rick is going to be looking at fiber digestibility and particle size and integrating those two for us. Ken's going to be covering that all-important safety factor when it comes to corn silage management and utilization on a farm. Rob is going to be looking at the economics of corn silage diets and having some information related to helping producers improve corn silage investments. And finally, we have a producer panel with three producers, Tony Brubaker, Walt Moore, and Ben Mullen, all covering some of the aspects related to their corn silage program, which is a big part of their forage programs. And it's going to be moderated by Jeff Harding, who's a member of our planning committee. So when it comes to corn silage, we have a lot of opportunities and a few challenges, and that's why we decided to make this a major emphasis on our program this year. One of the biggest opportunities we have is that corn silage can increase dry matter production per acre, which affects us a lot in the Northeast. It also gives us the possibility of increasing digestible energy produced per acre. So those are two very important things for us. The third one is it most often results in a decreased cost of diets. Now, the challenges have to do with the plant itself very often. The digestibility of the fiber is one of the biggest challenges that have been worked on for quite a few years and continues to get some work. There's starch differences, and we'll go through where those come into play. And the third one is that once we have corn silage as the major forage in our diet, it doesn't give us a lot of variation. And so if we have major problems with corn silage, it's going to make a big challenge. And so sometimes it makes management of a program that's all focused on one forage a bit more challenging. Now, corn silage is obviously not a new feed for dairy rations, been around for a long time, but it's definitely increasing importance for some herds. And in fact, I'm sure many of you work with farms where corn silage is the only forage on those farms. However, it wasn't always that way. And I think the best example I can give you for that is that a big part of my PhD thesis from 1982 had to do with corn silage as the only forage for the dairy cow for the entire lactation. Because back in 1982, and when I first learned ration balancing, we always started that diet out with 3 to 5 pounds of long dry, in the case from coming from upstate New York, grass hay. And that was pretty much the basis for every diet. But on farms today, we have so many that don't have any long dry hay, and that's been the case for quite a few years. Now, a topic I want to introduce just a couple things on has to do with the particle size of the diet. And this is a picture I took from a farm last year, shortly after they had just put up many hundreds of tons of corn silage in their bunker silos. And I'm only sieving it with the top 2 screens of the Penn State separator because I didn't need the third one, just to show you that, you know, this was a bit of a disaster. Cut really, really long. To start off with, it hadn't gone through a fermentation yet, but it was getting there, and the difficulties of getting a good fermentation on a silage like this is pretty awful. But my comment on something like this and is to that farm of, you know, it's going to be a long winter, because the first thing that I know is that the intake and the production of milk production from those cows are not going to be good. One of the first things we ever learned, and this goes back to Paul Koninoff's PhD thesis from Penn State, is that when we make our silage, corn silage, longer, we decrease, in this case it was a trend in dry matter digestibility, but fiber intake is going to be down. We also know that we tend to get more eating time and more ruminating time when we have longer feeds. And so the combination of those aren't good. The other classical one is when Daryl Mulfair did a study with corn silage on 4 very different particle size diets. So all the same feed, but different particle size. And the key thing that you find, and this is pretty consistent, is decreased dry matter intake. The other thing that Daryl showed was that if you have he had 4 distinct particle sizes, but it was all the same forage. And when you look at fecal particle size from these cows, it's all virtually the same, which means that that diet had to get broken down somewhere from the mouth to the back end of that cow. And we know that in a ruminant, they can have some fiber digestibility in the large intestine, but we also know that with the rate of passage of a high-producing dairy cow, it's going to be really small. So it's pretty much all rumen breakdown of that fiber. And there are really only 2 ways that fiber can be broken down once it gets in the rumen. One is the bacteria are going to digest it, but it has to be digestible fiber to have that happen. And the other is the teeth. She's got to ruminate it and chew it, and she only has so many hours of the day. And so we're going to see a reduction in dry matter intake, and eventually that's going to result in a reduction in milk production. So there's been more recent work done looking at the physical effective fiber needs of the cow, and that's where the 4 millimeter sieve of the Penn State separator comes into play, because that's where a lot of our PDF values can be derived from, is looking at everything that's on or above that 4 millimeter screen. So the end of the day is we've all got our recommendations for particle size, indeed, of corn silage diets. It's going to be based on the chemical and physical needs of the rumen. It also has to account for the digestibility of the forage in the diet. And so that's why some of these topics are going to be really important today. A final thing that I always find kind of interesting, and I'm just going to leave you this as a thought, is that corn silage is an interesting forage because of its physical and structural makeup. It tends to float. And when I do a demonstration and I put some TMR in a jug of water, and it's much like the effect that we see when we feed that same TMR to a cow and look in the rumen, but that corn silage floats. And I think it's an interesting thing that maybe someday we'll have some more information about that, but we don't right now. So we're going to move on and get to the rest of our program, and I appreciate you all taking part in this conference this year, and we wish you all the best.